My 3 ungrateful children decided to get rid of me once and for all. They left my husband, Joe, and me on a deserted stretch of highway, abandoning us to our fate under the scorching sun. "You two are a burden we can no longer carry," they said, before gunning the engine of the black Mercedes SUV and disappearing over the horizon. Days later, when the secret we had kept under lock and key finally came to light, they were the ones who returned, humiliated and begging for forgiveness. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. It all started on a Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee for everyone, just as I had done for over 40 years. At 72, my hands no longer had the same steadiness, but I could still fry eggs and brew a pot of coffee that Joe claimed was the best in the world. That morning, however, there was a heaviness in the air, a tension I knew well after months of living with my 3 adult children in the house that was once just ours. I heard Claudia's footsteps before I even saw her. My eldest daughter walked into the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, her face as closed off as a locked door. "Mom, how many eggs are you frying?" The question came loaded with accusation. "Just 4, honey. 1 for each of us." She sighed dramatically, tossing a stack of bills onto the table. I immediately recognized Joe's medical prescriptions. My husband had suffered from heart conditions for years, and his medication was our biggest expense. $600, Mom. $600. Do you have any idea how much of my monthly budget that eats up? I didn't answer. The words got stuck in my throat like fish bones. At that moment, Joe appeared in the doorway, walking slowly, bracing himself against the walls. At 75, every step seemed like a battle for him. His face, once full of life, was marked by a sadness that broke my heart. "Good morning, daughter," he said, trying to smile. Claudia didn't even respond. She grabbed a piece of toast, buttered it angrily, and stormed out of the kitchen as if we were contaminated with some contagious disease. We sat at the table in silence, eating slowly. I looked at Joe and saw tears forming in the corners of his tired eyes. This man had built this house with his own 2 hands, frame by frame. He had worked 6 days a week for 4 decades to give his children everything we could offer, and now we were treated like intruders in our own home. "They're right, Teresa," Joe murmured, staring at his plate. "We're causing too much trouble." Before I could respond, Richard walked into the kitchen, still in his uniform from the night shift at the factory. My middle son had always been the peacemaker, the balanced one, but his face showed the same exhaustion, the same irritation I saw in Claudia. "Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you." He sat heavily in the chair, rubbing his face with calloused hands. "This situation can't continue. You see the medical bills, don't you?" "Son, we can try to cut back on the meds," Joe replied, his voice trembling. "Talk to the doctor about generic alternatives, maybe." Richard shook his head. "It's not just that. It's everything. The food, the electric bill, the space. This house just doesn't work for 5 adults anymore." "And what do you suggest?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "There's a place. A state-run nursing home. It's not the worst. You'd have medical assistants, company from people your own age." "Are you talking about putting us away?" Joe's voice came out as a frightened whisper. "It's not putting you away, Dad. It's an opportunity for you to have a life more suited to your age." I felt the world crumbling around me. This house held our memories, our dreams, the scent of our children when they were babies. Every corner told the story of a lifetime of work and love. Frank, our youngest son at 34, appeared in the doorway still in his pajamas, even though it was past 11 a.m. "Are you guys talking about the facility?" "It's about time. I can't sleep with Dad's coughing in the middle of the night anymore." "It's not just a facility," Richard corrected without much conviction. "Whatever you call it. My girlfriend doesn't even want to come over here anymore. She's embarrassed." Embarrassed. The word hit me like a slap in the face. Our existence embarrassed people. Joe stood up slowly and walked out to the small backyard. I knew he was going to cry where no one could see him. He had always been like that. He held on to the pain to protect everyone else. "We need an answer soon," Claudia said, returning to the kitchen, now dressed for work. I already scheduled a visit to the home for tomorrow. In the following weeks, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. The children no longer spoke to us beyond what was strictly necessary. They came and went like irritated guests in a cheap motel. Joe barely ate, losing weight visibly. I woke up every morning with a knot in my stomach, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. And it happened on a Tuesday while I was hanging laundry on the line. I heard hushed voices in the living room and approached quietly. "It's all settled," it was Claudia's voice. "Are they coming to get them this afternoon?" "Yes," Richard replied. "Everything is agreed upon with the staff at the home." "And if they don't want to go?" Frank asked. "They will," Richard stated with a coldness that froze my blood. "Because they have no other choice." "Did you explain to them that it's temporary?" Claudia asked. "Of course it's not temporary." Frank laughed softly. "Do you know any old person who ever came back from a nursing home?" My world collapsed in that instant. I leaned against the wall to keep from falling. They planned to get rid of us forever, like old furniture that no longer matched the decor. I ran to the garden, where Joe was watering his plants with mechanical movements. "Joe," I whispered, grabbing his arm, "they're coming to get us today. They aren't going to visit us anymore after this." Joe dropped the hose to the ground. The water continued to flow, soaking his shoes. "Without even telling us," he murmured, the voice coming out like a whimper. "They don't want us anymore, Teresa. Never again." We hugged right there, crying like lost children. A lifetime of sacrifices. And this was how it ended. 2 hours later, the people from the nursing home arrived. 2 women in scrubs, professional smiles, sweet and empty words. Our children feigned sadness for the staff. They promised weekly visits, daily calls. We got into the van without looking back. Through the window, I saw Richard, Claudia, and Frank rush back into the house like criminals fleeing a crime scene. "Teresa," Joe whispered, holding my hand. "How did we get to this?" I had no answer, only silent tears that ran down my face as the van drove away from the house we had built with so much love. At that moment, we didn't know that fate was about to deal its own blow of justice. Hidden in Joe's old leather wallet, between ancient photos and yellowed cards, was an envelope that would change everything. The nursing home was exactly as I feared. An old building smelling of industrial disinfectant and urine, barely masked by cheap air fresheners. They put us in a shared room with 6 other people, separating us with flimsy fabric curtains that offered almost no privacy. It was a place where people went to die slowly, abandoned by families who swore to love them until the end. The nights were the worst. The constant moaning of the other residents, the stifled crying into pillows, the calls for children who would never come. Joe barely ate. He was wasting away before my eyes. I watched him every morning, seeing how his body shrank, how his eyes lost their shine day after day. "Teresa," he whispered on the 3rd night when I thought he was already asleep. "I'm not going to make it in here." I held his hand under the rough sheet. We were in separate beds, but we stretched our arms to maintain that contact which, after 50 years of marriage, was as necessary as air. "I know, my love. Neither will I." "Did the boys call?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. I didn't respond, feeling the pain in the words. They hadn't called. A week passed, then another. No calls, no visits. It was as if we had died to our children the moment we stepped into that van. The staff avoided our gazes when we asked if there were any messages for us. In the 3rd week, Joe had a crisis in the middle of the night. I woke up to his choked groan and found him clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Joe!" I screamed, jumping out of bed to help him. "Help! Someone help us!" The nurse on duty took nearly 10 minutes to appear. When she finally arrived, she had the bored look of someone who has seen this scene too many times. "It must just be indigestion," she said, without even examining him properly. "It's not indigestion," I insisted. "He has heart problems. He needs to go to a hospital." After much insistence, they called an ambulance. I waited alone in the ER waiting room for hours, my hands shaking with fear and rage. I tried calling my children, but none of them answered. I left desperate voicemails begging them to come. No one came. The doctor appeared around 5 a.m., his face serious. "Mrs. Miller, your husband had a heart attack. We managed to stabilize him, but his condition is delicate. Is he going to survive?" I could barely formulate the question. "For now, yes. But he will need intensive care over the next few days." I spent the entire night sitting by Joe's bed in the ICU, watching the monitors, counting every beat of his heart as if it were a precious treasure. Occasionally, he opened his eyes and tried to smile at me, but soon fell back asleep under the effect of the medication. The next morning, still with no news from the children, I went to the hospital bathroom to wash my face. I was exhausted, disheveled, my eyes swollen from crying. As I dried my face, I noticed my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked like a stranger, someone who had aged decades in just a few weeks. Returning to the room, I found a young nurse checking Joe's vitals. "Are you the wife?" she asked, with a kindness that took me by surprise. "Yes, we've been married for 50 years. She smiled, adjusting Joe's pillow with care. "That's beautiful. We rarely see couples who have been together that long." Something about the way she spoke, about how she cared for Joe, moved me deeply. It was the first gesture of genuine humanity we had received in weeks. "What is your name?" I asked. "Claire," she replied. "Claire Oliver." In the following days, Claire became our guardian angel at the hospital. She always appeared in the room, even when she wasn't assigned to care for Joe. She brought a kind word, adjusted the sheets, sometimes even brought me a coffee when she noticed I hadn't moved in hours. One day, while Joe slept, she sat next to me. "Mrs. Miller." "Excuse the intrusion. But your children, they aren't coming to visit you?" I shook my head, feeling the knot in my throat tighten. They put us in a nursing home and never showed up again." Claire remained silent for a few moments, her eyes filling with tears. "You know, my mom works as a caregiver for the elderly. The stories she tells are heartbreaking." "I understand," I replied, though in reality, I didn't. How could anyone understand the pain of being abandoned by their own children? Actually, my husband Paul and I have been talking a lot about this lately. I didn't immediately understand where she was going. About what exactly? About how much we would like to have grandparents in our lives. Mine died when I was little, and Paul's parents live overseas. We miss that wisdom, that presence only elders can offer. I stayed silent, unsure of what to say. Claire continued, hesitant. "We have a spare room at home. It's not much, but it's cozy. And I work here at the hospital. I can keep an eye on Mr. Joe's health. Paul has a small repair shop. He works from home. You would never be alone." My heart began to beat faster. Was it possible that this young woman, practically a stranger, was offering what our own children had denied us? "Claire, are you inviting us to live with you?" She blushed, suddenly embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I seem intrusive. It's just, well, Paul and I have talked about it a lot. We think we could help each other. You would have a home, and we would have the family we always wanted." Tears flowed freely down my face. I didn't know what to say. It was a miracle amidst the despair, a lighthouse in the darkness our lives had become. That night, when Joe woke up more lucid, I told him about Claire's offer. I saw his eyes fill with tears, the first light of hope illuminating his face in weeks. "They don't even know us." "Teresa," he whispered. "Why would they do that for us?" "Maybe there are good people in the world after all," I replied, holding his hand. "People who see value where our own children only saw a burden." A week later, when Joe was discharged, we didn't return to the nursing home. Claire and Paul came to pick us up at the hospital. Paul was a tall, lean young man with an easy smile and hands calloused from work. They welcomed us into their small but spotless apartment, where they had prepared a room specifically for us, with a queen-sized bed, floral curtains, and even a vase of violets in the window. "It's not much, but it's our home," Paul said, helping Joe settle in. "And now, it's your home too." That first night, lying next to Joe in the soft bed, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. He held my hand as he had done every night for 50 years. "Teresa," he whispered in the dark, "maybe God hasn't abandoned us completely." "After all," I smiled, though he couldn't see me in the dark. "Maybe not, my love. Maybe not." The days that followed were days of adaptation and discovery. Claire worked 1-2-hour shifts at the hospital, but always came home with a smile, asking how our day had been. Paul worked in the small workshop he had set up in the building's garage, repairing electronics. Sometimes Joe went down to be with him, watching his work, talking about the times when he also fixed things around the house. I started cooking again, something I always loved doing. I made lunch for everyone, baked cakes and bread that Paul and Claire devoured with sincere praise. For the first time in a long time, I felt useful, valued. One afternoon, while I was washing the lunch dishes, I found something in the pocket of Joe's old jacket that I had set aside to wash. It was a yellowed envelope with the letterhead of a law firm. It seemed to have been there a long time, forgotten. I opened it carefully and began to read the contents. My heart almost stopped. My trembling hands could barely hold the papers. I read and reread every word, incredulous. According to that document, my father, who had passed away over 10 years ago, had left a substantial inheritance that was being managed by a law firm. They had tried to contact us several times at our old address without success. The inheritance included 10 commercial properties in downtown, all rented out, and a cash amount that, with accumulated interest, exceeded $20 million. $20 million. More money than Joe and I had ever dreamed of having in our entire working lives. I sat on the kitchen chair, my legs shaking. How had that envelope gotten into Joe's jacket? Why had we never seen it before? And then, like a lightning bolt, realization hit me. The letters must have arrived at our old house when we were already living with our children. They must have intercepted everything. I waited for Joe to return from the workshop with Paul to show him the document. When he read it, his face went from disbelief to understanding, and finally, to rage. They knew, Teresa. Our children knew about this money and still treated us like trash. Claire and Paul were in the living room when we told them about the discovery. Their reaction wasn't one of greed or calculation, as perhaps many people's would have been upon discovering they were housing two suddenly millionaire seniors. It was of genuine indignation at the injustice we had suffered. "You need to contact that lawyer immediately," Claire said, picking up the phone. "We'll go to his office tomorrow morning." The next morning, we walked into the office of Mr. Mendez, a gentleman with gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses. He received us with an expression of relief. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, finally. We've been trying to locate you for years. We even hired a private investigator, but he couldn't find you after you left your old residence." "Our children," Joe said, his voice trembling with contained rage, "must have intercepted the letters." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable. "It's possible. We received some calls from people claiming to be your children, asking for information about the estate. Naturally, we didn't provide details without the presence of the legitimate heirs. We spent the next few hours signing documents, updating records, and listening to explanations on how to access our assets. In the end, Mr. Mendez handed us a provisional bank card. This card is linked to one of the checking accounts. I've set a daily limit of $50,000 for withdrawals and transfers until we regularize all the documentation. $50,000, an amount that previously would have seemed like an unimaginable fortune to me, was now just a daily limit. We left the office in silence, absorbing the drastic change in our situation. In the cab back home, Joe held my hand tightly. "What are we going to do now, Teresa?" I looked out the window, watching the city pass by. "First, we stay with Claire and Paul. They took us in when we had nothing. They deserve our loyalty." Joe nodded. "And our children will find out sooner or later." I felt a knot form in my throat. As much as the pain of abandonment was still fresh, they were our children, blood of our blood. "Let's wait. They'll come looking for us when they find out." In fact, it didn't take long. 2 weeks after regularizing the situation with the lawyer, we were having breakfast when the intercom buzzed. Paul answered and returned with a tense face. "Mrs. Miller, it's your children. All 3 of them. They say they need to talk to you urgently." I exchanged a look with Joe. We expected it, but not this soon. Claire stood up, instinctively protective. "Do you want me to kick them out?" Joe shook his head. "No. We'll hear what they have to say." When I opened the door, I barely recognized my own children, all dressed impeccably, as if going to an important meeting. Claudia wore expensive jewelry. Richard sported a watch that surely cost several paychecks, and Frank wore a designer shirt he could never afford with how little he worked. "Mom!" Claudia stepped forward to hug me, but I recoiled instinctively. "We were so worried. We looked for you everywhere." The lie came so fluidly from her lips that I almost believed it, if it weren't for the calculating expression in her eyes, which she could never hide from me. "Looked where?" Joe asked with a calm that hid the storm inside. "At the nursing home. Where where you were staying. Richard assumed his usual conciliatory tone. Dad, there was a misunderstanding. We went to visit you a week later, but they told us you had run away. And you didn't think to call the police? The hospitals? Weren't you worried we might be dead on the side of some road? The three of them looked at each other, uncomfortable. The truth, Joe continued, is that you're only here because you found out about the money. A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Claudia let out a theatrical sigh. Okay, let's be honest. Yes, we heard about the inheritance, and we came because we want to resolve this situation as a family. As a family. It was my turn to speak, my voice trembling with contained emotion. The same family that threw us away like trash, that intercepted our letters for years, that planned to abandon us forever in a house of horrors. Frank, always the most impatient, intervened. Look, we made a mistake. Okay, everyone makes mistakes. But we are your children. This money belongs to the family. Family. The word sounded like a cruel joke. Do you know who family is? Claire and Paul. Two young people who didn't know us at all, but took us in when we were alone and desperate. Who cared for us when Joe almost died of sadness and neglect. They are family. Claire and Paul, who were watching the scene discreetly from a corner of the room, seemed embarrassed by the recognition. Richard studied them with a calculating look. So, what is this? You traded your own children for two opportunistic strangers who are obviously after the inheritance? Paul stepped forward, his face red with indignation. We didn't even know about this inheritance until 2 days ago when they told us themselves. We took your parents in because it's what decent people do. Claudia let out a bitter laugh. How touching, but let's be realistic. This money belongs to our family, not strangers who showed up out of the blue. I looked at my children, trying to find some trace of the love I once believed they felt for us. I found nothing but greed and calculation. In contrast, I looked at Claire and Paul, who had given us a home when we had nothing to offer in return. The decision had already been made even before I realized it. You're right on one point, I said finally. The money belongs to family, and we choose who our family is now. My children's faces contorted into expressions of shock and rage. Richard was the first to recover his composure. Mom, you can't be serious. We are your children, your blood. Blood, Joe muttered. What good is blood when there is no love? Frank, always the most explosive, stepped forward threateningly. You can't do this. This money is ours by right. Paul stepped between us and Frank, protecting us instinctively. I think it's time for you to leave. Not without resolving this, Claudia screamed. We're going to sue. We'll prove that you aren't mentally fit to manage this money. That was the last straw. The idea that they would try to declare us incapacitated just to get their hands on the inheritance showed how low they were willing to go. Get out of our house, I said with the firmest voice I had ever had. The three of them stood motionless for a moment, shocked by my determination. Then, like a storm finally breaking, they began shouting accusations, threats, promises to return. Paul called the building security, who politely but firmly escorted my children to the exit. Before leaving, Claudia turned one last time, her eyes shining with rage. This isn't over. You're going to regret this. When the door finally closed, I felt my legs give way. Joe hugged me, and we cried together not for the threats, but for the definitive death of the last illusions we still held about our children. That night, lying next to Joe, I reflected on the course our life had taken. Did we do everything wrong, Joe? Did we fail as parents? He sighed deeply, stroking my gray hair. No, Teresa. We gave love, education, values. They chose their path. We can't blame ourselves for that. And now? What will we do with so much money? We will live, Teresa. We will live the years we have left with dignity and purpose, and we will help those who actually deserve to be helped. I fell asleep with those words resonating in my mind, imagining the possibilities opening up before us. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, the future wasn't just a gloomy horizon of abandonment and loneliness, but an open field of possibilities. The following months were months of transformation. With part of the money, we bought a spacious condo in the same building where Claire and Paul lived. We insisted they move in with us, forming a family not by blood, but by choice. At first, they hesitated. Mrs. Miller, Claire argued, you don't owe us anything. We did what anyone with a heart would do. Precisely why we want you close, I replied. Because hearts like yours are rare. The condo had 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room overlooking the city park, and a large kitchen where I went back to preparing meals for everyone with gusto. Joe got a corner on the balcony for his plants, which flourished along with his renewed spirit. Paul set up a better workshop in the building with new equipment we bought him. His repair business grew quickly, and soon he was able to hire 2 assistants. Claire continued working at the hospital but reduced her hours to have more time with us. Our new life seemed like a dream after the nightmare we had lived, but the shadow of the past kept chasing us. Our children didn't give up easily. First came the lawyer letters, claiming we weren't mentally fit to manage our assets. Mr. Mendez, our attorney, handled answering all of them with medical evaluations proving our sanity. Then, they tried to approach us in public. One day, while we were shopping at the mall, Claudia appeared, as if by chance, feigning surprise at meeting us. "Mom, Dad, what a wonderful coincidence!" Joe squeezed my hand tightly, and Claire instinctively stepped to our side. Paul, who was pushing the shopping cart, stopped as if facing a venomous snake. "What do you want, Claudia?" I asked bluntly. She tried to maintain the forced smile, though her eyes revealed contained rage. "I just wanted to see how you are. I miss you." "You miss our money, you mean?" Joe replied with a frankness that surprised me. Claudia's smile vanished like ice in the sun. "That's not fair, Dad. We are family." "We were," I corrected. "Now we have a new family. One that values us for who we are, not for what we have." Claire and Paul remained silent, but their firm presence beside us said more than any words. Claudia looked at them with barely disguised contempt. "These opportunists turned you against your own children. Don't you realize you're being manipulated?" It was Paul who responded with a calm that contrasted with the fury in his eyes. "The only manipulation I see is yours, trying to make your parents feel guilty after everything you did." We left the mall quickly after that encounter, feeling Claudia's gaze following us like a frustrated predator. On the way home, Joe remained silent, his face tense and pale. "Joe," I called him, worried. "Are you feeling okay?" He shook his head, but I saw a solitary tear run down his wrinkled face. "It's just, as much as I know they did wrong, it hurts to see they turned into these people." That night was difficult. Joe had nightmares, waking up several times, calling out for the children. I held him, trying to ward off the ghosts tormenting him, but I knew some wounds were too deep to heal completely. The next week, I received an unexpected call. It was Sonia, Richard's wife. We always had a cordial relationship, though never close. She sounded nervous on the phone. "Mrs. Miller, can I meet you to talk? Just the 2 of us?" I hesitated, fearing another trap for my children, but something in her voice seemed sincere. "Okay, but I want it to be in a public place." We met at a coffee shop downtown. Sonia looked haggard, with deep circles under her eyes and hands shaking as she held her coffee cup. She waited for the waiter to walk away before speaking. "I came without Richard knowing, if he finds out I'm here." "What's going on, Sonia?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Things have been complicated since you left. At first, I thought you had really accepted going to the nursing home. Richard said it was best for everyone, that you'd be better cared for there." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "When I found out you had run away, I got scared. I wanted to call the police, the hospitals. But Richard, he said you were fine, that you had decided to live on your own. And you believed him?" She shook her head, ashamed. "Not completely. But he's my husband, and I never imagined they had abandoned you to die." Sonia covered her face with her hands, crying silently. "Forgive me, Mrs. Miller. I should have done more. I should have insisted. I felt my anger dilute a little before this broken woman in front of me. Why are you telling me this now?" She wiped her tears with a napkin. "Because I can't take it anymore. Since they found out about the inheritance, they're obsessed. They only talk about that. They only plan how to get that money. I don't recognize my husband anymore. And your children? How are they?" The mention of the grandkids seemed to trigger a new wave of tears. "The kids ask about you. They miss you. But Richard forbade them to talk about it." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. "My grandchildren, forbidden from even mentioning our names. What do you want from me, Sonia?" She took a deep breath, seemingly finally getting to the point. "I want to ask you not to cut ties completely with your grandchildren. They aren't to blame for their parents' choices." It was a fair request. The children truly weren't to blame. How can I see them if Richard forbade them from even talking about us? "I could bring them to visit you." "When he's at work?" The proposal was tempting, but dangerous. "Wouldn't that put you at risk?" Sonia smiled sadly. "Some things are worth the risk, Mrs. Miller. The kids need to know they still have grandparents who love them." After nearly an hour of conversation, we agreed that Sonia would bring the grandkids to visit us the following Sunday, while Richard would be at a football game with his friends. I returned home with mixed feelings. The joy of the possibility of reuniting with my grandkids mixed with the fear of more pain, more conflict. When I told Joe, I saw his eyes light up for the first time in days. "The little ones, Teresa, we're going to see our grandbabies." Claire and Paul supported us, but with caution. "We have to make sure it's not a trap," Paul said. "How about I stay close during the visit?" "Just to ensure." The agreed-upon Sunday came. I arranged the apartment as if I were receiving royalty. I baked cookies, a chocolate cake, bought soda, prepared sweets. Joe walked back and forth, nervous as a teenager before his first date. When the doorbell rang, my heart almost leaped out of my mouth. Paul opened the door cautiously. Sonia entered with Mike, 10, and Annie, 7. The children looked confused and intimidated. "Grandma?" Mike called hesitantly, searching for me with his eyes. I couldn't hold back the tears. I opened my arms, and the two of them ran toward me, burying their faces in my chest, just as they used to do when they were smaller. Joe joined the hug, laughing and crying at the same time. "Grandpa, why did you disappear?" Annie asked with that cruel sincerity of children. "Dad said you didn't want to see us anymore." Joe swallowed hard, fighting to keep the rage from showing. "That's not true, my princess. We never stopped loving you. Never." Mike, always more observant, looked around with curiosity. "This house is really cool. Is it yours?" "Yes," I replied, grateful for the change of subject. "Do you want to see it?" The next few hours were pure joy. We showed them the apartment, told stories, played board games we had bought specially for the occasion. The kids devoured the sweets and asked for more. Claire and Paul integrated naturally, as if they had been part of the family for years. When it was time to leave, none of us wanted it to end. Mike hugged me tight, whispering in my ear, "Grandma, can I come back more times?" I promised not to tell Dad. My heart shrank. "Of course, my love. This house will always be open to you." Sonia promised to bring them again when it was safe. After they left, Joe and I hugged in silence, processing the emotional roller coaster that afternoon had been. "They are ours," he whispered. "No one can take that from us." That visit was like water in the desert for our souls, parched by the pain of abandonment. It gave us strength to continue, to look beyond the suffering and see possibilities for happiness. The following week, we began to solidify a plan that had been forming in our minds for some time. Using part of the inheritance, we bought a large house on the outskirts of the city with expansive grounds and fresh air. We talked to Claire about the idea of transforming the place into a home for abandoned elderly people, not a warehouse for people like the one we escaped, but a true home. It would be a place where seniors could live with dignity, I explained, with quality medical assistance, activities, attention. Claire was enthusiastic about the idea. "I can coordinate the health side. I know nurses and caregivers who would be perfect for this project." Paul suggested the house have a workshop for seniors who wanted to stay active. Many still have incredible skills and just need a space to use them. Thus was born the New Life Home, our project of retribution, not vengeance against our children, but a way to transform our pain into something positive so that others like us wouldn't have to go through the same hell. The New Life Home quickly became the center of our lives. We hired a team of professionals led by Claire, nurses, caregivers, physical therapists, nutritionists. Paul supervised maintenance and the craft workshops. Joe dedicated himself to the garden, teaching other seniors to cultivate flowers and vegetables, and I coordinated the kitchen, ensuring all meals were tasty and nutritious, like the ones I prepared for my family. Our first resident was Miss Connie, an 80-year-old lady we rescued from the same house of horrors we had escaped. When we found her, she was thin, apathetic, almost giving up. Her children visited her once a year at Christmas out of obligation. At the New Life home, Miss Connie regained the sparkle in her eyes. We discovered she had been a piano teacher, and we got her an instrument so she could play again. Then came Mr. Albert, a 7-8-year-old former carpenter, abandoned in a hospital after a mild stroke. The family simply didn't come back to get him after discharge. In Paul's workshop, Mr. Albert rediscovered the joy of working with wood, even with his physical limitations. Soon he was teaching other seniors to make small objects, picture frames, boxes, toys. In 6 months, the home had 15 residents, each with their story of abandonment, each finding new purpose. We transformed suffering into a mission, and that brought us a peace we didn't imagine possible. The visits from the grandkids continued, always in secret. Mike and Annie loved going to the home where they played with the adoptive grandparents, as they affectionately called the residents. Sonia became an important ally, helping us maintain contact with the children without Richard knowing. One day, however, the inevitable happened. We were having lunch with the grandkids at the home when a familiar car screeched into the parking lot. Richard got out, slamming the door, his face contorted with fury. "I knew it! I knew you were betraying me!" he screamed at Sonia, who paled instantly. The children ran behind me, frightened by their father's explosion. Joe stood up, leaning on the cane he used on days when the pain in his legs was stronger. "Richard, calm down. The children only came to visit their grandparents." "Grandparents?" He spat the word as if it were poison. "You are nothing to us anymore. You chose the money over the family." "We chose the money?" Joe's voice trembled, but not with fear, with indignation. "You, who abandoned us when you thought we had nothing. You, who hid our letters, who lied, who threw us in a place to die." Richard stepped forward threateningly, but Paul and 2 male staff members stepped between him and us. "Leave here now," Paul said with quiet authority, "or we will call the police." "The police?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Why? For wanting to protect my children from manipulative old people." At that moment, Mike took a step forward, facing his father with surprising courage for his 10 years. "Dad, are you lying? Grandma and Grandpa never manipulated us. You are the ones who won't let us see them." Richard seemed stunned by his son's intervention. For a moment, I saw a flash of shame in his eyes, but it passed quickly, replaced by familiar rage. "Get in the car, all of you, now." The children cried, begging to stay a little longer. Sonia tried to calm them, promising they would return, but I knew from Richard's hard look that he would do anything to ensure that didn't happen. Before leaving, Richard stopped at the door, pointing a finger at us like a threat. "This is going to end, you'll see. No one steals my children from me." After they left, I collapsed into a chair, feeling the weight of every single one of my 72 years. Joe approached, putting his hand on my shoulder. "They will come back, Teresa. Someday they will understand." "But when, Joe? How much time do we have left in this life?" He had no answer. No one did. The following week, we received a court notice. Richard was filing for sole custody of the children, alleging that Sonia was mentally unstable for taking the kids to see us in secret. He also requested a restraining order that would prevent us from seeing the grandkids. Mr. Mendez, our lawyer, tried to reassure us. "This is clearly retaliation. No judge will prevent grandparents from seeing their grandchildren without a very serious reason." But I wasn't so sure. I had seen the hate in Richard's eyes. He would do anything to hurt us, even if it meant using his own children as weapons. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. We prepared as best we could, gathering testimonies about our character, about the quality of the New Life home, about how well the children were treated during visits. Meanwhile, we had no more news from Sonia or the grandkids. Richard had cut all communication, even changing phone numbers. On the eve of the hearing, we were in our condo kitchen trying to distract ourselves with dinner preparations. Claire and Paul had gone out to buy missing ingredients. The intercom buzzed, and Joe went to answer. "Who is it?" he asked cautiously, as we had become accustomed to doing since the incidents with the children. "It's me, Dad, Frank." We exchanged looks of surprise and apprehension. Frank, our youngest son, the most distant of the 3, had never reached out to us since the breakup. "What does he want?" I whispered to Joe. "I don't know. He says he needs to talk to us urgently." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to deny him entry, to protect us from more pain. But another part, the part that never stopped being a mother, wanted to see my son. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, something had changed. Let him up, I decided finally. Frank looked different when he entered the apartment. Thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, hair disheveled. He no longer had that youthful arrogance that had always characterized him. "Mom, Dad," he murmured, seeming incapable of continuing. "What do you want, Frank?" I asked, maintaining emotional and physical distance. He sank onto the sofa, seeming suddenly exhausted. I don't know where to start." Joe sat in the armchair opposite him, looking him straight in the eyes. "How about the beginning? Why did you abandon us in that place?" Frank lowered his head, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture I recognized from his childhood. "It was Claudia's idea at first. She said you were too much work, that you cost too much." Richard agreed immediately. He said it was the most logical solution. I hesitated. I just followed what they said. It was always like that. "And the letters?" I asked. "The letters about the inheritance that you hid from us for years?" Frank looked up, surprised. "You know about that?" "Of course we know. How do you think we found out about the money?" Whew, he took a deep breath. "It was Claudia who found the first letter. She showed it to Richard, and they decided to hide it. I only found out when you were already in the nursing home. And still, you did nothing," Joe observed without accusation in his voice, just stating a fact. "No," Frank admitted. "I did nothing." A heavy silence fell over us. The air seemed dense with decades of resentments, betrayals, omissions. "Why are you here now?" I asked finally. Frank pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket. "Richard is planning something to try to take the money from you anyway. I heard him talking to a lawyer about." He hesitated again. "About proving you are mentally incompetent." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How does he intend to prove that? We are perfectly sane. "He has a doctor willing to sign false reports. He's going to present them tomorrow at the custody hearing as proof that you are dangerous to the children." Joe turned pale. "Would he go that far? Using his own children like that?" Frank nodded sadly. "You have no idea how obsessed he is with that money. He's not the Richard we knew anymore." I looked at the envelope in his hands. "What is this?" "Proof. Recordings of him discussing the plan, copies of emails exchanged with the doctor, even a draft of the false report. I took everything from his computer last night." I took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why? Why are you helping us now?" Frank stayed silent for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. "Because I regret it every day. I regret, not the money I lost, although, yes, at first it was just that, but I regret not being man enough to defend you. Regret letting Claudia and Richard decide everything. Regret being a coward." Tears ran freely down his face now, without him making any effort to hide them. "I know it's too late. I know you will never forgive me, and I'm not even asking for that. I just don't want Richard to hurt anyone else. Not you, not Sonia, not the kids." Joe stood up with difficulty and, to my surprise, walked over to Frank. He put his hand on his son's shoulder in a gesture I hadn't seen in so long it seemed to belong to another life. "It's never too late to do the right thing, son." Frank looked up with hope and disbelief fighting in his eyes, swollen from tears. At that moment, we heard the key turning in the door. Claire and Paul had returned from shopping. Seeing Frank, Paul instinctively stepped in front of Claire in a protective stance. "What is he doing here?" Joe made a reassuring gesture. "It's okay, Paul. Frank came to help us." Claire looked with suspicion, grocery bags still in her hands. "Help you? How?" I briefly explained the situation while Joe took Frank to the kitchen to get him a coffee. Paul examined the contents of the envelope, verifying the authenticity of the documents. "If this is real, the judge is going to eat Richard alive tomorrow," he commented, flipping through the papers. "It is real," Frank affirmed from the kitchen. "I was there when he planned it all. I can testify." Claire approached me, worried. "Are you okay with this? With him here?" I looked toward the kitchen where Joe and Frank were talking in low voices. There was so much history between us, so much pain, so much wasted love. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I think it's a start." That night, Frank slept on the living room sofa. Before we went to bed, he called me. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why the New Life home? Why use the money to help other old people instead of," I don't know, traveling the world, enjoying it? The question took me by surprise, not because of the doubt itself, but because Frank was genuinely interested. Because we understand the pain, I replied simply. Because we know what it is to be abandoned, to be treated like something disposable. And because we discovered that the best way to heal our own pain is by helping others heal theirs. Frank nodded slowly, processing. You guys are better people than we will ever be. No, son, we just learned some lessons the hard way. The next morning, we entered the courthouse prepared for battle. Mr. Mendez had worked all night incorporating the new evidence into the case. Frank walked with us, nervous but determined. Richard was already there with his lawyer, showing that confidence of someone sure of victory. When he saw Frank at our side, his expression transformed into pure shock, followed quickly by rage. Traitor, he hissed as we passed him. Frank kept his head high, not responding to the provocation. The hearing began with Richard's allegations, painting a picture of mentally unstable grandparents, potentially dangerous to the children. His lawyer presented the infamous medical report, speaking with the authority of someone holding irrefutable proof. When it was our turn, Mr. Mendez stood up calmly. Instead of directly refuting the allegations, he asked permission to call a surprise witness. Frank Miller, son of the defendants and brother of the plaintiff. The judge, a middle-aged man with tired but attentive eyes, authorized it with a gesture. Frank walked to the witness stand, trembling visibly. He took the oath and looked directly at the judge, avoiding Richard's murderous gaze. Mr. Frank, began Mr. Mendez, can you tell us about your brother's true intentions in this lawsuit? Over the next hour, Frank unraveled the entire plot. The deliberate abandonment at the nursing home, the interception of the letters about the inheritance, and finally, Richard's plan to declare us incompetent based on fraudulent medical reports. He presented the emails, the recordings, documents proving every one of his claims. Richard turned redder by the minute, almost foaming at the mouth with rage. His lawyer tried to interrupt several times, claiming the evidence was inadmissible, but the judge maintained order in the court. Finally, Frank reached the hardest part of the testimony, his own participation. I am also guilty, he declared, voice cracking. I didn't have the courage to stop it. I didn't defend my parents when they needed it. I allowed them to be abandoned and mistreated. And I am here now not to redeem myself. I know that's impossible, but to stop more harm from being done. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. The judge took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes, as if trying to process everything he had just heard. In 30 years on the bench, he said finally, I have rarely seen a case of such cruelty against the elderly, and coming from children, it is simply repugnant. He turned to Richard, who seemed to have physically shrunk during his brother's testimony. Mr. Richard Miller, I am dismissing your petition for sole custody and the restraining order. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney to investigate possible crimes against the elderly and procedural fraud. I strongly suggest you get a good criminal defense attorney. Richard stood up, furious. You can't do that. They have our money. Mr. Miller! The judge's voice boomed. One more word and I will have you arrested for contempt. This hearing is adjourned. We left the court in a state of shock and relief. In the parking lot, we found Sonia with Mike and Annie waiting anxiously. Well? She asked, holding the children's hands. We won, I replied simply. Mike and Annie ran to hug us. Behind us, Frank watched the scene with an expression of pain and regret. Uncle Frank, Mike shouted, noticing his presence. Did you come to see Grandma and Grandpa too? Frank approached hesitantly, looking at me as if asking for permission. I nodded slightly. Yes, Mike. I came to stay. In the months that followed, our family went through a slow and delicate reconstruction. Frank began working at the New Life home, initially just helping Paul with maintenance tasks. He kept his distance from the other residents, as if he didn't feel worthy of socializing. Slowly, however, he opened up. His first significant breakthrough happened with Mr. Albert, the former carpenter. One day, I found the two of them in the workshop, hunched over a piece of wood. Mr. Albert Placely, Albert was patiently explaining how to do a specific carving, and Frank was watching with a concentration I hadn't seen since he was a boy learning to ride a bike. My hand still shakes a little, Mr. Albert was saying. But the wood doesn't mind. It waits. Frank nodded, absorbing not just the technique, but the philosophy behind it. I watched discreetly from the doorway, feeling a knot in my throat. My youngest son, who had always been the most restless, the most impatient, learning about patience from an old man who had been abandoned just like us. "Mom." Frank saw me and immediately looked embarrassed, as if caught doing something wrong. I'm trying to learn." "Go on," I encouraged. "Mr. Albert is the best teacher you could have." The old man smiled, showing the few teeth he had left. "Your son has talent, Mrs. Miller. Good hands for wood." I left them working and went to the home's kitchen, where I supervised the residents' lunch. Joe was in the garden as always, now accompanied by 3 or 4 seniors who had become his apprentices in the art of cultivation. Claire came running, excited with news. "Mrs. Miller, the Department of Social Services approved our application. The New Life Home is now officially recognized as a nonprofit public utility institution." I hugged her, happy for the achievement. It meant more than recognition. It meant we could expand, receive more seniors, offer more services. "Your dream is growing," Claire commented, watching the residents chatting animatedly in the living room. "Look how much good you are doing." "Our dream," I corrected. "Without you and Paul, this would never have gotten off the ground." At night, we returned to our condo. Frank was now living in a small studio in the same building, trying to rebuild his life away from the toxic influence of his siblings. He occasionally dined with us, still cautious, as if walking on eggshells, fearing rejection at any moment. "How was your day?" I asked him while serving the soup I had made. Frank hesitated, stirring the steaming liquid with his spoon. "Well, Mr. Albert is teaching me to make a jewelry box. He says I can give it to someone special when I finish." "That's wonderful," Joe commented. "I always thought you had a knack for crafts since you were little." Frank looked surprised. "Really?" "Of course. Remember that birdhouse you made in school? It was the best in the class." A shy smile appeared on my son's face. These small moments of reconnection, of shared memories, were precious, like stones on a path we were rebuilding step by step. "I heard from Sonia today," I commented, changing the subject. "It seems Richard isn't cooperating much with the grandchildren's visits." Frank's smile disappeared. He's always been stubborn. And now with the criminal case, he's more bitter than ever. Richard was facing charges of procedural fraud and attempted fraud for the false medical report. Claudia, although not directly involved in that part, was also answering for elder neglect. The cases were moving slowly through the justice system. "The kids asked if they can come on Sunday," I continued. "Sonia said she'll bring them even if Richard doesn't like it." "I can stay in my apartment that day if you prefer," Frank offered, looking at his plate. "I know my presence might complicate things." Joe put his hand on his son's arm. "No. You are part of the family now. The boys will like seeing their uncle." Frank nodded, too emotional to respond. Sunday came quickly. Mike and Annie came with Sonia, bringing drawings they had made at school. Frank was nervous, expecting rejection from the children. To his surprise, Mike ran to hug him. "Uncle Frank, Grandma said you're making wooden toys. Can you make me a truck?" The tension dissolved instantly. Frank promised he would make the best wooden truck Mike had ever seen. Annie asked for a dollhouse, and soon everyone was sitting at the table drawing plans for the toys. I watched the scene with an overflowing heart. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely, but it was a new beginning, a chance to build something different. Sonia pulled me into a corner away from the others. "I have news," she whispered. "It's not good." My heart sped up. "What happened?" "Richard is trying to sell the house. Our house, where we live with the kids." "How? Why?" "He has serious financial problems. The lawsuits, the lawyers, and it seems he lost his job because of the scandal. He's drinking a lot. He's aggressive." I felt a pang of guilt that I tried to push away. Richard had brought this on himself with his choices. "You have somewhere to go if you need to," I said. Sonia interrupted me with a gesture. "I'm not asking for money, Mrs. Miller. I just wanted you to know. Things are falling apart for him. For all of us, actually." I looked at the children playing with Frank and Joe, innocent, in the middle of an adult war. "What are you going to do?" She sighed deeply. "I'm thinking about separating. He's not the man I married anymore. He's consumed by hate, by obsession." I hugged her instinctively. "If you need anything, we are here." When I told Joe about the conversation later, he became thoughtful. Richard has always been too proud, he commented. That pride is going to destroy him if he doesn't change. What can we do? Joe looked out the window at the lit city. Nothing, unfortunately. Everyone has to find their own path. We offered our forgiveness, our open door. The rest depends on him. 2 weeks later, Frank appeared at our apartment earlier than usual, his face pale. What happened? I asked, immediately recognizing the signs of disturbance. It's Richard, he replied, sitting heavily. He had an accident. He's in the hospital. Joe lowered the newspaper he was reading. What kind of accident? He crashed the car. He was drunk. Frank ran his hands over his face. Sonia just called me. She said he's in the ICU in critical condition. I felt my world shift. As much as Richard had hurt us, as much anger as I felt, he was still my son. The idea of losing him was unbearable. We have to go to the hospital, I decided immediately. Joe nodded, already getting up to get our coats. Frank looked surprised. Do you really want to go? After everything he did? Frank, Joe said gently. When you have children, the love never ends completely. It can be buried, it can transform, but it never disappears. At the hospital, we found Sonia with eyes swollen from crying. Mike and Annie were with their maternal grandmother, shielded from the drama unfolding. The doctor informed us that Richard had suffered head trauma and internal bleeding. They had done emergency surgery, but the next 48 hours would be crucial. He was so upset the last few days, Sonia recounted. He started drinking early. He drove off like a madman. The police officer who attended the accident said he hit a utility pole doing over 60 miles per hour. We waited in the waiting room. Time dragged with the peculiar slowness of moments of crisis. Frank paced from one side to the other. Joe held my hand, both lost in thoughts and silent prayers. When the doctor returned, his serious face told us the story before he even spoke. I'm sorry, he said simply. We did everything we could. Sonia collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Frank leaned against the wall as if his legs could no longer hold him. Joe hugged me tight, and I felt his hot tears against my neck. I cried for the son I had lost twice. Once to greed, and another to death. I cried for the boy he had once been, for the man he could have become if he had made different choices. In the following days, like in a fog, we organized the funeral. Claudia appeared, her face marked not just by grief, but by fear. With Richard's death, the lawsuits against her gained new weight. She was alone now, without her brother to share the blame. When our eyes met at the cemetery, I saw something I had never seen before in my daughter's eyes. Vulnerability. There was no arrogance anymore, no calculation, just a devastated woman facing the consequences of her choices. After the ceremony, when almost everyone had left, Claudia approached hesitantly. Mom. Her voice was just a whisper. I don't know what to say. I looked at this stranger who was my daughter. Then don't say anything. Sometimes silence is better. I never wanted this to happen. With Richard. No one wanted it, Claudia. But our actions have consequences, often beyond what we can foresee. She lowered her gaze, hands trembling slightly. What's going to happen to me now? The question took me by surprise, not for the content, but for the genuine vulnerability it carried. That depends partly on you, I answered honestly. The lawsuits will continue, but there is always room for reparation, for change. Joe, who had approached silently, added, Our door is open, Claudia. It always has been. But you need to enter with an open heart, not with the old intentions. She nodded, tears running silently. There were no hugs, no promises, just that small opening, that possibility of a different path. In the car back home, Joe held my hand. Do you think she will really change? I asked. I don't know, he answered honestly, but everyone deserves the chance to try. That night, looking at old photos of our family, the 3 small children, smiling, not yet scarred by the decisions they would make, I felt a deep melancholy. So many possibilities, so many paths that could have been taken. Don't torture yourself, my love, Joe whispered, sitting next to me. The past is gone. We can only build the future. I nodded, putting away the album. He was right, as always. The next day, we would continue our work at the New Life home. We would continue to welcome Frank on his journey of redemption. We would continue to offer Claudia the possibility of reconciliation. We would continue to be grandparents to Mike and Annie, support for Sonia. We would continue to live, love, forgive, because in the end, I discovered that is the true wealth, not the millions in our bank account, but the capacity to transform even the worst wounds into something that heals ourselves and others. 3 years have passed since Richard's death. Years of transformations, healings, and new beginnings. The New Life home has grown, now housing 30 seniors. We bought the house next door and expanded the facilities, creating a specialized wing for seniors with dementia and Alzheimer's. Claire coordinates a team of 15 professionals, implementing innovative care practices. Frank found his purpose in carpentry. What started as personal therapy transformed into a vocation. He created a workshop to teach the trade not only to the seniors at the home but to at-risk youth. He said it was his form of reparation, helping to bridge generations that normally wouldn't meet. Claudia, against all expectations, also found her way to redemption. The first few months were difficult. She performed community service as part of her plea deal for the crimes against us, working grudgingly at the home. I remember the day I saw her truly change. She was helping Miss Connie eat when the elderly woman had a memory lapse and confused Claudia with her own daughter, who rarely visited. "Marina, it's so good you came today," Miss Connie said, holding Claudia's hand. "I missed you so much." I saw my daughter freeze, not knowing how to react. For a moment, I thought she would correct the lady, perhaps even rudely. But to my surprise, Claudia smiled gently. "I'm here now," she said simply, squeezing the old woman's hand. "How are you feeling today?" When Miss Connie fell asleep after the meal, Claudia left the room visibly shaken. I found her in the garden crying silently. "She called me daughter," she murmured when I approached. "She thinks her daughter abandoned her. Like we did to you." I said nothing, just sat beside her on the bench. I never really understood what we did to you." I put my hand over hers. "Now you understand." "It's horrible," she whispered. "How could we do that? How could I do that to my own parents?" That afternoon marked the beginning of Claudia's true transformation. She started volunteering at the home, even after serving her sentence. She went back to school, graduating in gerontology. Today, she coordinates a support program for family caregivers, helping people facing the challenge of caring for elderly relatives at home. Our relationship never went back to what it was before. Some fractures are too deep to heal completely, but we found a new balance, a mutual respect born of shared pain and healing sought together. Sonia moved into an apartment near ours with Mike and Annie. The children grew up having grandparents present, coming to visit us almost daily after school. Mike, now 13, spent hours in the workshop with Frank, learning the secrets of woodworking. Annie, at 10, preferred the garden, where she helped Joe cultivate flowers and vegetables that supplied the home's kitchen. Joe and I, at 75 and 72 years old, found a peace we never imagined possible after the trauma of abandonment. We used most of the inheritance to create a foundation that funds ethical nursing homes across the country, establishing rigorous standards of care and dignity. One Sunday afternoon, we were all gathered for lunch. Joe and me, Frank and his girlfriend Mariana, a nurse he met at the home, Claudia, who came alone, still not ready for new relationships, Sonia with the kids, Claire and Paul with their little daughter, Elena. The table was full, conversations were animated, children's laughter, a scene that seemed impossible years ago. After lunch, while the others chatted in the living room, Joe called me to the balcony. The sunset painted the sky orange and pink, a view that never ceased to move me. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, noticing his distant gaze. He smiled that smile I knew so well after 53 years of marriage, about the journeys, about how sometimes we need to get completely lost to find the right path. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his body against mine. Who would have thought our worst moment would turn into our greatest blessing? The abandonment wasn't the blessing, he corrected gently. It was what we chose to do with it. At that moment, with the golden light of the late afternoon illuminating his wrinkled face, Joe looked wiser and more handsome than ever. His hands, now shakier with age, still held mine with the same firmness as when we were young. "You know what gives me the most peace?" he continued. "Seeing that we broke the cycle. Mike and Annie are growing up seeing the value of elderly people. learning that love isn't conditional. I nodded, watching our grandkids through the window. Mike was showing Claudia a small wood carving he had made, and she was praising him sincerely. Annie was drawing something in her notebook, probably another one of the portraits she liked to make of all the seniors at the home. "They won't abandon their parents when they get old," I commented, "nor their own children when their turn comes." Joe nodded. "And that is worth more than the 20 million. We stayed there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set, thinking about the lessons life taught us the hard way, that true value isn't in money or possessions, but in the love we give and receive, that the deepest wounds can become sources of healing, that it is never too late to start over. A week later, Joe had a stroke while working in the garden of the home. It was quick and painless, the doctors said. He left doing what he loved, surrounded by people who respected and admired him. The funeral was different from Richard's. There wasn't just family, but dozens of seniors from the home, employees, neighbors, people whose lives had been touched by Joe in some way. Each had a story to tell about his kindness, his wisdom, his ability to forgive even the worst offenses. Frank organized for every senior at the home to plant a tree in Joe's memory, creating a small forest at the back of the property. "A place where people can sit and feel his presence," he explained, "just like we all felt it when he was in the garden." Claudia coordinated a memorial where hundreds of photos of Joe were displayed, not just old ones with our original family, but mainly new ones, showing him on his mission at the home with the new family we had built. The first months without him were the hardest of my life. Not even the abandonment by the children had hurt as much as this definitive absence. Every morning I woke up instinctively seeking his presence beside me, only to find the void. What saved me was the purpose we had built together. The home, the seniors, the foundation, our rebuilt family, everything needed to continue. Joe would have wanted it that way. One afternoon, 6 months after his departure, I was sitting in the garden he had created. The trees planted in his memory were still small, but already showing the first spring buds. Mike came to sit next to me, now almost as tall as me. "Grandma," he began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, my love. Don't you hate my dad? For everything he did?" The question took me by surprise. Mike rarely spoke of Richard, as if the trauma of the loss had turned the subject into a taboo. "No, Mike," I answered honestly. "I don't hate him. I hated him for a while. But I discovered that hate only hurt me, not him." "But how could you forgive? After everything?" I looked at my grandson's young face, already showing traces of the man he would be one day, and chose my words carefully. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the harm didn't happen. It means choosing not to let resentment control your life. Your father made terrible mistakes, but he was also a complex person with his own pains and limitations. Mike stayed silent, absorbing. "What I learned, Mike, is that life is too short to live with anger. Your Grandpa Joe used to say that holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." The boy smiled slightly, recognizing the kind of wisdom his grandfather used to share. "I miss him," he said quietly. "Me too, my love. Every day." We sat there, grandmother and grandson, sharing the comfortable silence that only exists when there is true understanding. I watched the young trees swaying in the light breeze and thought of all the lives that would still benefit from the shade they would one day offer, just as so many people benefited from the legacy Joe and I had built from our pain. Life continues its cycle, with losses and gains, abandonments and welcomes, endings and new beginnings. The important thing, I finally discovered, is the choice we make in the face of each blow, each wound, letting them harden and embitter us, or using them as a source of wisdom and compassion. Joe and I chose the second path, and even though he is no longer here to see the fruits, I know his essence lives in every corner of the New Life home, in every smile of a senior who regained dignity, in every hug from our grandchildren, in every gesture of redemption from our children. Our children threw us away like trash, believing we were just a burden. They didn't know they were discarding not just $20 million, but the most valuable love they could have received. Some learned the lesson in time, others, unfortunately, did not. As for me, I continue my journey, grateful for every day, for every memory, for every opportunity to transform pain into purpose. I don't know how much time I have left in this life, but I know that when my time comes to leave, I won't leave just money or properties. I will leave a legacy of forgiveness, of reconstruction, of love that persists despite the worst betrayals. A legacy worth much more than 20 million. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video appearing on the screen, because in it, there is a story of betrayal and change like you've never seen before.